Imagine a world where someone who's already sacrificed so much is forced to endure even more cruelty. That's exactly what happens to a disabled veteran when a group of local gang members targets him, destroying his only means of mobility, his wheelchair. This isn't just any wheelchair, it's his lifeline, the one thing that allows him to stay independent and get through each day. But what these thugs didn't know is that this veteran's son is no ordinary man. He's a Navy SEAL, trained to fight for what's right, no matter the odds. As tensions rise and the gang continues to harass his father, the SEAL is about to make his presence known in a way that could change everything. Will the gang push too far, or will the father and son unite to bring justice? Stay tuned for an unbelievable twist that'll leave you on the edge of your seat. The veteran, a man who served his country proudly, had always found solace in the quiet moments of his daily life. He never asked for sympathy, never wanted to be treated like a hero, but he couldn't escape the harsh reality that life had dealt him. The gang, a group of reckless young men from the neighborhood, had started harassing him weeks ago, throwing insults and threatening him whenever they saw him rolling through the streets. At first, he ignored them, hoping they'd lose interest. But that was before they decided to destroy his wheelchair. Without warning, they vandalized it beyond repair, leaving him stranded in the middle of the sidewalk, helpless. The veteran's heart sank. He knew he couldn't fight back. He was physically unable to. But what they didn't know was that the SEAL, his son, had been watching from a distance. He was back home on leave, and he'd heard what happened. Now he was preparing to step in. As the veteran sat on the cracked sidewalk, the weight of his broken wheelchair pressing down on him, his mind raced with thoughts of helplessness. He had been through wars, faced enemy fire, and yet nothing prepared him for this betrayal on his own turf. The pain in his joints flared up, but it was nothing compared to the sting of being treated like a target. The gang members had been getting bolder, their intimidation tactics escalating. They taunted him, laughing as they destroyed the one thing that gave him independence. Each insult felt like a deeper wound, not just to his body but to his dignity. Meanwhile, his son, the Navy SEAL, was gearing up for something he hadn't done in years: come back home and fight for his family. He had seen enough of the world's violence, but something about this felt different. This wasn't a battle in a foreign country. This was personal. As a SEAL, he had learned to stay calm under pressure, but seeing his father in that state ignited something in him he couldn't ignore. The gang, too, had their own dynamics. The leader, a guy named Ricky, had always felt like he needed to prove himself. He was young, reckless, and on a path that had already cost him much more than he realized. His crew looked up to him, following his every move. But as he stood over the wrecked wheelchair, he began to feel a small, nagging doubt. It wasn't fear, not yet, but something was gnawing at him. What if this time they went too far? What if they crossed a line they couldn't come back from? But Ricky shook it off, refusing to show weakness in front of his guys. He wasn't about to let some old vet make him question his choices. Little did he know, the veteran's son was already making his way to them, a storm brewing in his heart. And the closer he got, the more the tension thickened, like a fuse about to ignite. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street where the confrontation was about to unfold. The gang members loitered around the wreckage of the wheelchair, laughing, their voices growing louder as they taunted the disabled veteran. Ricky, the leader, was leaning casually against a nearby wall, trying to act like it was just another ordinary day, but something in his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. He glanced down the street, a faint tension tightening in his chest. It was then that he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, slow but purposeful, like the beat of a drum in the still evening air. The veteran, who had been quietly sitting in his broken wheelchair, suddenly lifted his head, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of the figure in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. He recognized that stance, that walk. It was his son, the son he hadn't seen in months, the one he had raised to be strong, determined, and fearless. And now he was coming straight for the gang. Ricky straightened up, his pulse quickening. Who the hell is that? he muttered under his breath, his crew now looking in the same direction. The closer the figure got, the more the air seemed to crackle with tension. The veteran's son's every step echoed louder, as though he was marching towards something inevitable. The gang members shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in the atmosphere. They had never dealt with someone like this before. Ricky's bravado began to falter, and for the first time, he felt unsure. He wasn't afraid of the old man in the wheelchair, but something about the sun, the seal, sent a chill through him. His crew, now uneasy, exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what would come next. The veteran's son stopped a few paces away from them, his jaw clenched, his presence commanding. "You messed with the wrong family," he said, his voice low, but carrying a weight of authority that silenced the street. For a moment, everything stood still. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ricky opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His crew had gone quiet, sensing that this wasn't going to end the way they expected. And then, in the stillness, the first sign of movement came from one of the gang members, a young guy who nervously took a step forward. His hands were shaking. The tension was unbearable, and it felt like the calm before a storm. No one moved, no one blinked, as the inevitable standoff hung in the air, everyone waiting for the first spark that would set everything off. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a loud screeching sound cut through the air, tires skidding across asphalt. The gang members snapped their heads to the side, their attention momentarily diverted. The veteran's son didn't flinch, keeping his gaze locked on Ricky. But the distraction was enough. Out of nowhere, a black SUV pulled up fast, coming to a sudden halt right in front of the group. The doors swung open, and two more figures stepped out, dressed in dark clothes, their faces hidden behind tinted sunglasses. The veteran's son's instincts flared. He could sense danger before he even fully registered who these new players were. His hand subtly moved to his side, where his military training had left him with the reflex to be prepared for anything. Ricky's face went pale. The two newcomers weren't just random tough guys. They were part of a much larger, more dangerous network, one that Ricky had been unknowingly tied to. These were not just street thugs, but enforcers sent by a powerful crime syndicate that controlled this neighborhood. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The newcomer in front, a tall, intimidating figure with a scar running across his face, stepped forward and looked directly at Ricky. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm but cold. "This veteran and his son, they're not your problem, but you are ours." Ricky, shaken, tried to play it cool, but it was clear the power had shifted. His gang was no longer in control of this situation. The veteran's son stepped closer, his eyes now scanning the newcomers. He could tell this wasn't just about his father anymore. These men weren't interested in petty street fights. They were part of something bigger, something much darker. The stakes had just escalated in ways none of them had anticipated. Ricky's bravado was quickly fading as he realized he had unwittingly crossed a line that put not just him, but everyone around him in far more danger than they could have imagined. The veteran's son wasn't just there to protect his father anymore. He was now facing a whole new enemy. The game had changed. The tension was unbearable as the two men from the crime syndicate moved closer, their eyes fixed on Ricky and the gang. The veteran's son stood his ground, knowing that this moment would determine everything. He wasn't just a father protecting his disabled parent anymore. He was now facing enemies he'd never expected to encounter in his own neighborhood. The man with the scar spoke again, his voice cold and authoritative. "You've been messing with the wrong people. This isn't just about a wheelchair or a few insults. You've stirred up something far bigger than you can handle." Ricky's arrogance finally broke. I didn't know. "We didn't know you were involved," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. The gang behind him shifted uncomfortably, the situation spiraling out of control. The veteran's son took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the scared man. "It's too late for apologies. It's time to fix this." His voice had the sharpness of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. Just as things seemed poised to explode into violence, a strange noise came from behind them. The veteran, still in his broken wheelchair, had somehow maneuvered it closer to the chaos, his hand shaking as he grabbed the small gun hidden under his jacket. He wasn't as helpless as they thought. The sudden sound of the gun cocking sent a shock through everyone. The crime syndicate men froze, their eyes darting toward the veteran, who was now surprisingly steady in his wheelchair, aiming the weapon. His son turned to look at him, shocked but impressed by the sudden move.